Hello and welcome to our in-person audience and everyone that's joined online. I'm Mitali Mukherjee. I'm director at the Reuters Institute. And first and foremost, thank you to Maison Francaise for inviting us and sort of making us a part of this space. Thank you to Stefan and his team. And thank you to our guest who's joined today, Michael Christopher Brown. I'll do the boring bits first, which is that this is, as I said, a hybrid event, which means that there's people joining in online and, of course, our in-person audience. But just for ease of filtering questions, which may come towards the end, there is a link up there or a QR code. And if you scan that, you can just pop your questions in on Slido, and I'll try and make space for as many as is possible. So this is going to be a 1-hour wheel, which will be in part presentation by Michael, some space for a chat between him and I, and then of course questions from you as well. As some of you know, I find it sort of deeply awkward to introduce someone who is the main event, but I will give it a go. So a big welcome to Michael Christopher Brown, who is a National Geographic photographer, an author, a filmmaker, and he's really used the documentary image to talk about some of the world's most pressing issues. I think he cut his teeth at covering, documenting, and photographing the war in Libya. And from then on, he's moved to many, many different regions, including China. What we're discussing today is his upcoming joint project, which, as you heard, is poetry and photography together with Pulitzer Prize winning Palestinian poet Mosab Abu Toha. And it is called, and I find this interesting, The Difference Between Bullets and Stones, with a strike through with the difference between, and maybe that's something Michael will talk about. It is important to share that all the proceeds from this book will actually fund efforts for aid organizations, including Doctors Without Borders, the Middle East Children's Alliance, all of whom are at this point operating in Gaza. That's just the setup. So you're going to walk us through some of the images and some of the text in your upcoming book. But maybe before you start doing that, it would be interesting to talk a little bit about why this is being funded by the Kickstarter campaign and what it is that you were thinking of when you began the seed of this project.
Yeah. So the idea came in June or July. We thought maybe we would do some kind of a fundraiser. And we had some good support, but I think also it was a bit complicated because I think at the end of the day, a lot of people were giving more directly into Gaza, into the aid efforts. So, but fortunately, we were able to fund the boat, so that's great. And we have interest from a publisher that's in the U.S. Yeah, that's a Palestinian publisher actually, the only one in the U.S. So hopefully that'll happen as
And
well.
it's a summer 2026 launch. Is that the
Yes,
plan?
maybe winter probably.
Okay,
Yeah, probably spring, something like that. Yeah.
good. Take it away.
Yeah. So thank you. It's great to be here. Thanks everyone for coming. I will just. I feel a little bit awkward sitting up here as an American guy presenting work on Palestine, to be real. But let's see. Well, a couple years ago, when a little over a couple years ago now, when the most recent Gaza war began, I was connected with Motaz Zaiza, and that began a friendship. And he visited over the summer in California, and we had a road trip. And I was looking for someone who I could collaborate with, a Palestinian writer, and he recommended Mosab. And of course, I'd seen his work already in the New Yorker,
Yeah.
and I had not read his books. And I read his poetry books, and I was just really blown away. And I thought, wow, maybe we could make a work that combined his poetry with my work from Palestine. The photographs and the poems, many of them were made around the same time, roughly, 2019 or so, and give or take a year. And the poetry is mostly from Gaza, but also he wrote some of them from Egypt. whereas the photographs are all from the West Bank and East Jerusalem and a couple places in Israel, but they're all more or less focused, centered around the Palestinian people. And we thought at the end of the day that it would work because it was really, it's about humanizing a people. It's not about a specific place necessarily. It's, you know, and so in the words of Mosab, the book humanizes lives that are very often reduced into headlines, illuminating the deeper emotional and spiritual story of a people who continue to survive, create, and dream of freedom. So what I was going to do is just show the book as it is now,
Sure.
which is very rough. It's not designed. It's missing the introduction by Misan Harriman and some other text, captions, a fair amount of stuff, but it just gives you sort of a rough idea of how we're looking at the layout now. So yeah, and this image on the cover was inspiration from a piece of work that I saw when I was in Ramallah. That was actually a work that I'm looking for. It's a Palestinian artist who's a painter, and the image essentially is the West Bank, which is here, with Gaza on the bottom, of course. Gaza's over here generally, so we moved it over and then flipped it. So it looks like a butterfly. And the symbolism of the butterfly represents many things, of course. And in this case, I think it's you know, speaks into the transformation, the hope, memory, and the exile. And this is paired on the rear cover with something that Mosab shared on his Instagram. How come they cut off a butterfly's wing? How will she fly in the garden and smell the flowers of the world? So let's just launch into this. I should probably show the PDF. Let's see. Okay. Why is it when I dream of Palestine that I see it in black and white? Some of these I'll speak to and others I'll just roll through. So this is a road leading, this is Jericho over here in the background. And this is sort of, would it be possible if we bring the lights down a little bit? This is at a museum in Jerusalem. This is at a protest in Jerusalem outside the Knesset. This is at the Western Wall. A young Jewish girl. This is in the old city of Jerusalem. Okay, so I'll read these. Al-Quds is Arabic for Jerusalem. I have never been to Al-Quds. It's around 60 miles from Gaza. And the people who live 5,000 miles away can move there. Well, I cannot even visit. This is an old city, an old mattress outside the old city. So we structured the book as sort of very loose at the beginning, just a way into the place and the people to give an idea of the landscape and the texture and a bit of the this is also my first time presenting this.
You're doing great.
Please excuse me for it's kind of an emotional work for me as well, of course, combining the images in the poem. There's a dog giving birth to the 7 puppies beneath a white mulberry tree under the clear night sky. The dog groans with pain. Puppy after puppy cries, unaware where they are. For them, it's still dark, whether in her belly or outside. What country are we in? That's not a question for a puppy to ask. Only mother dog in the soil beneath her can hear the branch of the mulberry tree. For every moan, a blossom comes out. From her bedroom window, a mother, still awake, watches the dog, its puppies, and the mulberry tree, while her child, eyes closed, suckles from her breast, and the drone watches over all. This is on Highway 1, near Jericho. This is in Jerusalem. Forgive me, I cannot remember the name of this village, but I have it in the captions. But it's east of Jerusalem in the West Bank. It's in the Golan Heights. My grandfather was a terrorist. He tended to his field, watered the roses in the courtyard, smoked cigarettes with grandmother on the yellow beach, lying there like a prayer rug. My grandfather was a terrorist. He picked oranges and lemons, went fishing with brothers until noon, sang a comforting song en route to the farriers with his piebald horse. My grandfather was a terrorist. He made a cup of tea with milk, sat on his verdant land as soft as silk. My grandfather was a terrorist. He departed his house, leaving it for the coming guests, left some water on the table, his best, lest the guests die of thirst after their conquest. My grandfather was a terrorist. He walked to the closest safe town, empty as the sullen sky, vacant as a deserted tent, dark as a starless night. My grandfather was a terrorist. My grandfather was a man, a breadwinner for 10, whose luxury was to have a tent with a blue UN flag set on the rusting pole on the beach next to a cemetery. It's also on Highway 1. This is a solar farm that's in the south of Israel, just south of West Bank. This is in the city of Nablus in the West Bank. Oh, but to the shadow I had left alone before I crossed the border, my shadow that stayed lonely and hid in the dark of the night, freezing where it was, never needing a visa, to my shadow that's been waiting for my return, homeless except when I was walking by its side in the summer light, to my shadow that wishes to go to school with the children of morning but couldn't fit through the classroom doors, to my shadow that has caught cold now, that's been sneezing and coughing, no one there saying to it, God bless, and to my shadow that's been crushed by cars and vans, its chest pierced by shrapnel and bullets, flying with no wings, my shadow that no one's attending to, bleeding black blood through its memory now and forever. When I read this, I think of, Mosab was injured when his family, the building they were in was hit by an airstrike, and I think one of the ways we connect is because he grew up in a war zone, but I've worked in war zones occasionally, and I was also injured on a couple different occasions, and and I lost friends, although Mosab has lost many dozens of friends and family members here in the past years. This is in Nablus, and a weekly protest outside Nablus. We deserve a better death. Our bodies are disfigured and twisted, embroidered with bullets and shrapnel. Our names are pronounced incorrectly on the radio and TV. Our photos plastered onto the walls of our buildings fade and grow pale. The inscriptions on our gravestones disappear, covered in the feces of birds and reptiles. No one waters the trees that give shade to our graves. The blazing sun has overwhelmed our rotting bodies. And this is an old poster of a woman on a wall in Nablus in the old city. This is in Ramallah. He's going to prayer. Well, Nablus, Hebron, outside the tomb of the patriarchs and the Ibrahimi Mosque. The old city of Jerusalem. In the summer, I drink the tea with milk, mint. In the winter, I add dried sage. Anyone who visits, even if it's a neighbor knocking at the door to ask about what day or date it is, I offer them tea. Offering tea is like saying marhaba. They once said Palestine will be free tomorrow. When is tomorrow? What is freedom? How long does it last? This is at a cafe in Nablus. And then this is a sequence from the Old City in Jerusalem. The Old City, for anyone who hasn't been there, is a very interesting place to see just this potpourri of culture and people from around the world. And there's a Muslim quarter, and there's a Jewish quarter, and everyone is living very close and interacting very closely. Yafa is my daughter's name. I put my ears near her mouth when she speaks, and I hear Yafa's sea waves lapping against the shore. I look in her eyes, and I see my grandparents' footsteps, still imprinted on the sand. My city's streets are nameless. If a Palestinian gets killed by a sniper or a drone, we name the street after them. Children learn their numbers best when they can count how many homes or schools were destroyed, how many mothers and fathers were wounded or thrown into jail. Grown-ups in Palestine only use their IDs so as not to forget who they are. One of the complications of making this book, of course, was how much I should show, and who I should show, and how I should show the other side, right? The Jewish people, and of course, it's something that I have a lot of friends on both sides, but I spent most of my time covering the Palestinians because that's just my work in general usually covers, the people with less power, less, material, whatever. When I was in Jerusalem, I covered the Orthodox community quite a bit because I met the son of a rabbi, and so he introduced me into the community. And this is one of the events I covered, which was a protest against the draft. So one of the reasons why it's included in the book, of course, is because if you grow up in Israel, you have to join the army, and I believe it's a couple of years, and these people were protesting. And these are other Jewish people who are protesting, they're protesting the draft. It's a complicated place, of course, like any place. This is at the Western Wall. And it's so much of we're living in a time, of course, where you can't, I think in a way it's always been this way. You can't trust anything you hear or see from anyone. It doesn't matter who it is. And it's one of the reasons why I made a point of actually going into these places. And, with Palestine, I've been there 9 times, probably collectively spent 6 months there, driving around, walking around, and a lot of my other work, it's the same. I have done a fair amount of parachuting into places, but ideally I really enjoy living in places. So the Congo, I lived for a few years. I still go back there and do workshops and work, and the same in China. And I spent almost a year in Libya, and now I have a daughter in LA, so it's a little more complicated. But this is the Haredi Burqa sect. So this is actually a Jewish community. So a lot of people, when they've seen this image, they think that it's a young Jewish boy with a Muslim woman, but it's not the case. This is on near Tel Aviv. I can't remember the name of the neighborhood, but Jerusalem. People say silence is a sign of consent. What if I'm not allowed to speak? My tongue severed, my mouth sewn shut. So this is near Nablus. There's no airports in the West Bank, so the people have to fly from Tel Aviv, or a lot of people go through into Jordan, or if you're in Gaza, you go to Egypt. This is Watchtower. This is in a settlement near Nablus, and this is right down the road from the settlement. The borders are those invented lines drawn with ash on maps and sewn into the ground by bullets. These signs you see all over the place in the West Bank when you're leaving Israel and entering. This is, he was being released from the prison. This is not Hamas, of course, the flag. This is Fatah, which is and this is a wedding, also near Nablus, in a little village. Some musicians in Ramallah. Another wedding. You will ask for my website. I am no spider, and my site is wherever a rose grows, wherever clouds cast their shadows on roofless houses, wherever a bomb does not fall, wherever a child does not confuse a cloud for bomb smoke. So the reason I mentioned that it's so, of course, as a photographer, I have to be in places anyway. And a lot of times it's really, I stay, the kind of photographs I enjoy making are photographs where I'm not changing anything in a scene. So I'm not asking you to move or anything. If it's a portrait, sometimes I'll do that. But even a lot of the portraits in here, I don't move. So that requires a lot of time and just observing. And so you can see patterns and you can understand the way that, the community flows. But I say that because I think something I've learned in this work is that I can't really know anything unless I see it. And I think this is kind of lost nowadays when we go on social media and the news and we follow whoever it is. It's very, very hard to, especially in war zones, because you have info wars happening on both sides all the time. And one of the hard things with Gaza is that no international journalists were let in. But I think in Gaza is a very interesting case, and maybe the first time that it happened where there was this collective witness, where it's like when a hospital comes down, if it's one videographer who sees it and makes a video of the explosion, that's one thing. But if it's 100 people, then we can't say that it was not happening. And that really gave me a lot of hope that the collective witness was working in Gaza, despite the efforts of the Israelis to control the information. Because clearly any government, when they don't allow journalists inside, whatever you think of the government, that is the message. When press is not allowed into a place, and you have to ask why. And then you have to question everything that the side preventing that is saying. This is also at a wedding, a mosque. They're counting the donations. When it rains, farmers think the sky loves them. They are wrong. It rains either because the clouds cannot carry the sacks of water too long, or because a sparrow has said a prayer when it heard the thirsty roots begging. This is wheat harvest near Nablus. Horse racing. Balata. This is a refugee camp that's in Nablus. It's called Balata, which is this really super dense Palestinian refugee camp. I think this is one piece of information that a lot of people don't understand, is that there's still so many Palestinians living in refugee camps for many decades now. Also in Balata. Well, things you may find hidden in my ear. When you open my ear, touch it gently. My mother's voice lingers somewhere inside. Her voice is the echo that helps me recover equilibrium when I feel dizzy during my attentiveness. You may encounter songs in Arabic, poems in English I recite to myself, or a song I chant to the chirping birds in our backyard. When you stitch the cut, don't forget to put all these back in my ear. Put them back in order, as you would do with the books on your shelf. The drone's buzzing sound, the roar of an F-16, the screams of the bombs falling on houses, on fields, and on bodies, of rockets flying away, rid my tiny ear canal of them all. Spray the perfume of your smiles on the incision. Inject the song of life into my veins to wake me up. Gently beat the drum so my mind may dance with yours, my doctor, day and night.
Maybe shall we pause and just have a little bit of a chat about
Sure.
what we've seen so far? And thank you for sharing that,
Yeah.
and thank you for sort of also holding. Yeah, please. Thank you for sharing that and also sort of holding Mosab's words. I know, I wish he could have joined us, but I know he can't. But I think you held them with as much care as he wrote them. The title of our conversation was meant to be Beyond the Headlines, and I think we've traveled a far distance from there. And in some of the words that you read and the images that followed, it was clear what brought them together. But I want for you to share with everyone what you think was the bond between what Mosab wrote and the images that you were capturing in the space.
I mean, it's a great question. I think it's hard. I'm trying to think of the writer's name whose quote I remember, where he said, "I write them, I don't explain them." but I'm a photographer. Certainly, I'm very close with the work, so it's hard for me to explain exactly what my work, how it functions, and the effect that it has. But I think in some ways, it's my view coming in is like a 40,000-foot view in some ways, but in other ways, it's the conflict is something that I've followed for many years.
Yeah.
And Mosab, of course, his words and his poems are his life, you know. So the poetry is really this. It's one of the reasons why I was very nervous reading his poems. One, because I don't know how he would read them. I mean, I've heard him read his poems, but also that 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 it's like I'm holding his heart. So how do I present his heart? It's like something, and so I think it is meant to give an understanding of what it feels like being being a Gazan, being a Palestinian, and then trying to show with imagery what it looks like. But of course, it's always problematic, right? It's like anyone's view of anything is comes with their history, and so like one of the first calls I had with Mosab about making the book and the fundraiser, he spent an hour showing me these color photographs of Gaza that were just very beautiful.
Yeah.
Photographs of the beaches and the seas and the fishermen and people and like all the things that were missing at that time. And in some ways, when I look at this work, I mean, I see some imagery of kids who are laughing and having fun, but it's a very I was very much in a space where I was reading a lot about the conflict, a lot about the region, and it was around the time where the Golan Heights was really in the news a lot, and I was just being an American and knowing that part of my taxes are going to fund this, because I don't. It's Israel is just an extension of the U.S. in many ways. It wouldn't be doing what it does without. And so, yeah, carrying a lot of guilt, and also just like trying to capture the emotion that I felt.
Yeah. I was going to ask, because so much of the work that you've done is in areas that are ridden with conflict.
Yeah.
In the natural construct of things, they would be considered very news intense. Do you identify yourself as a journalist, even internally, when you're shooting, when you're taking pictures? Because so much of what you shared had such a strong storytelling quality to it. It wasn't about let me click what happened post event. You're telling a story. It felt like.
Yeah.
Are you a journalist when you're clicking?
Generally, no. No, generally, I'm just it's a, of course, I work quite a bit as a photojournalist.
Yeah.
If I have a job for a specific magazine asking me to cover conflict,
Yeah.
then I will approach it in a certain way. But in general, I like really whatever the subject is, I find a way that I could really connect with it and feel something for it. And then, because I know that's the only way, as any artist, it's kind of the only way. Oh, I let it slip. I'm an artist. It's as you can see, there's another show here that's actually AI generated imagery, which is kind of the exact opposite of this. So I like making new things, and I like just following my gut and really connecting with the emotion that I feel, and that really comes from my childhood, because my family they're healthcare workers, and so they worked in orphanages overseas. And my dad's a physician, and my mom's a nurse. My sister's a nurse, But my parents worked in orphanages overseas a lot when I was growing up, and they would bring my sister and I into Mexico in the orphanages, and we had like 35 exchange students in our house over the years, and so like the world was always coming in, and we were going into the world, and my dad would photograph in these places and come back and do shows in front of the community, and play it with music and raise money and and so from a very young age the idea of like using photography in this way, but then of course entering a time in which it's like the way that I photograph and how I photograph and who I photograph and all these things are coming into question.
Yeah. You also had a dark room in your house, from what I've read, and
When I was a
sort of
kid,
before photos
yeah,
being developed. Is that where
yeah,
you kind of learned to build this
yeah.
syntax of telling stories from behind the camera?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, also like I didn't. When I was a kid, I had a really bad speech impediment, so I avoided speaking, and I just had like there were a number of years. My mom had cancer, and she was like it was really bad, and she made it, and fortunately, but it just some things happened at when I was, I guess it was like fourth grade or fifth grade, that just really triggered me and just made me go inward. and and I was really into Buddhism and mythology in high school, and just like, and so photography became a way that I could actually express myself and sort of enter the world, without speaking, without, sort of hiding behind the camera.
Yeah. Um, and behind the camera, you chose to cover conflict.
Oh yes, yeah. Well, conflict
Talk to us
also.
about
I mean,
that.
yeah. There's a lot of like a lot of American families. There's a long history of military service in my family.
Yeah.
My seventh great grandfather was in the Revolutionary War, fighting against the British. My second great grandfather was a colonel in the Civil War, like a big colonel, and so, my grandfather's my dad. Everyone like, except for me, was in the military. So there's a storytelling that happened and happens in the family, and also just playing video games as a kid and reading books and having curiosity about like all aspects of life.
Yeah. Um, I imagine the room has people with different interests, but perhaps also photography specifically, not journalism, which is what I'm representing. And you've worked with so many different mediums. You've also sort of worked with an iPhone, and that's a really interesting story of how that came to be. And I'd love
Yeah.
for you to share that with everyone who's listening.
Yeah, for sure. So that was, I started using a phone in 2008, just a year after the phone came out. And I was using it a lot in New York and China. I was living in Beijing at the time. And then the Arab Spring of 2011, Egypt, Libya, Bahrain, Syria, all these places. And the phone was really the device of the Arab Spring uprisings. Social media and the phone really began, sustained, furthered the revolutions. And so part of my interest in using a phone for covering the Libyan revolution was that, because I was using the same tool that was used to really organize people and spread information. And the phone at that time was also like the quality was getting a lot better.
Yeah.
But yeah, interestingly, for the techies in the audience who use phones or who are curious, the phone at that time, the camera was not instant. So you'd hit the button and there was a little delay. And so I used an app called Hipstamatic, which was instantaneous, but then you could only take one image every 15 seconds. And a lot of times it would crash. And so a lot of the photographs that I made in Libya on the phone, I actually lost. So anyway, that's.
But you did use the term collective witness when you were talking about some of the work that's been documented in Gaza. And I think in some ways that's something that journalism is experiencing as well, that it's sort of not the domain of any one institution or any one individual to share the news. You have terms like citizen journalists, you have people documenting what's happening in their lives. Do you think it's been a liberating movement or moment where people can speak for themselves in some ways with the support of devices like these?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, very liberating. But also, the what is true and what is real
Yeah.
is always something. So, I mean, we sort of had this conversation yesterday when we were speaking about artificial intelligence, and just now how it's at a level where the quality is so it's so photorealistic that often you can't see the difference between something made with AI and a real photograph. And so the danger in that and the risks and everything. And I think it's something that is just making culture more visually sophisticated and expanding the genres. It is, I mean, when you think about writing, it's always been the case that you can write about anything, but unless you have integrity and unless you're known to be someone who can be trusted, like how do we trust what you write? And the same with, photography is so young in comparison with writing. And I think that we'll anyway, that's another subject. But I think yeah, the collective witness is amazing because it does give more validity to what we're seeing, but it's it's still, yeah, it's very difficult in this time because even much of that content is, some of the content, it's hard to know how authentic it is because of the quality,
Yeah. Um, I mean, both photography and writing can be subjective. When you're taking photographs, you're also thinking at that moment of what to leave out
Yes.
and what to include. How do you think about it when, especially when you're covering areas that have a red thread of conflict running through them? Are you always thinking with the images that you capture about what am I holding out and what am I holding within?
Yeah, sure. There's actually there's a good example of that. Tim Hetherington, who was a British war photographer who was killed in Libya, and he and I had a conversation while we were covering the war in Libya, and it was about it. It was about like how we would often see scenes where there were bodies of government soldiers on the ground, and sometimes if we photographed the bodies, some of the revolutionaries, especially the younger ones, would come in front of our cameras and they would flash, the peace signs and
Yeah.
be smiling and happy. And for me, that always really rubbed me in the wrong way. And so I usually sort of avoided including those fingers, although I do have imagery where the peace signs, even in the book I made called Libyan Sugar,
Yeah.
there's imagery of the peace signs in there. But one of the reasons why I included those images in the book is because for Tim, it was important that he actually include everything as it appeared instead of editing in his mind, right? So it's constantly a process, whether it's in a war zone or anywhere it is, anywhere I am, is this constant editing process, and so it's it's a it's kind of a battle because you want to make imagery that is effective and that communicates an idea, but also at the same time captures reality
Yeah.
and captures the world as it is. So
You mentioned AI a few times while sort of talking about the process of photography, and there is a high degree of squeamishness within journalism about the use of AI, particularly for images, what that does with audiences, whether it's, it harms the trust relationship or whether it's okay. You have used that in a project, haven't you? How are you thinking about AI and images?
yeah, I just so a couple years ago, I made a project called 90 Miles, and the project is about the Cubans leaving Cuba, coming into the U.S. There's been millions of Cubans in the past few years who've left Cuba because of, especially after COVID, because of supplies, health, food, but while I was working in Cuba, I had no access, and there was no way for me to cover the story of Cubans leaving. And I've never seen a report, actually, of Cubans leaving in the watercraft coming to the U.S. There's a lot of photographs online where you can see the watercraft and you can see the Coast Guard, in Miami and such. But so when AI had reached a point, some of the AI image generators, the one I used was called Midjourney, and it had reached a point where visually it looked very realistic. And so my interest in using it was to, well, first of all, of course, artificial intelligence is not photography, of course, is not photojournalism. It is its own medium. And so I saw it as a new storytelling medium that was using photographic looking imagery. And so for me, it was that there was no access into the story. Even if I had access into the story, it could possibly endanger the people that I photographed, because Cuba is a relatively small country. Everyone knows each other. The people who were left there. And then also just the broader story of Cuba. There's so many events, historical events in Cuba where there's no documentation. And so I was just really intrigued by this idea of making imagery that could, sort of like history paintings, like a history painter will research information about a scene or historical event and then make a painting. And that's how I saw these illustrations, as a way to maybe tell stories in a new way.
Yeah. I want to hold space for questions, and I'll get to them in just a second. So maybe a final question from me. You spent such a long time sort of documenting what you saw. What was the most extraordinary detail about the region that you think most people miss? And was there a space that you kept returning to
Which region?
across Gaza? Sorry, you didn't go to
Yeah.
Gaza, across Palestine and Israel.
Yeah, I would have loved to have had access into Gaza. I applied a few times and I had access.
Probably met the same fate as most.
Yeah. Yeah, I had access from the other side. Of course, Hamas was running the government, and so I had access from them, but I didn't have access from the Israeli side. I think it's probably because I was applying with the New Yorker, and they didn't like the New Yorker, and they maybe still don't. But so I never had access into Gaza. So I think like what kept drawing me back is part of it is just the conversations that I was having at home in California, from people who would be reading the news. And again, at that time, it was a lot of the news was about the Golan and what was happening in the Golan, and people saying this and that. And then I had never gone there, and I went to the Golan, and I realized immediately why this area is so important, because it's a high ground, very strategic, looks into Syria, looks into Israel, very beautiful. It's right near Mount Hermon. It's clear why it's so contested. But then within that, who are the I think it was going to see, I think the kernel that I sort of kept coming back into is that, how can I sort of show this place and show these people and show their everyday life and what this place looks like in sort of the purest way, and by pure I just mean how can I capture their humanity and who they are and what they're, I think that's and in a way that's really why the book is why we're making it, is because at the end of the day it's we can't we can give you a lot of facts and historical information and say this and that, but at the end of the day it's we're trying to just humanize people. It's really, really easy to lose it in conflict.
Yeah.
Lose. I mean, there was one. Well, one of the incidents that happened in recent months where there was a crew of Al Jazeera journalists, of like 6 journalists, who were bombed, and apparently they were killed because one of them was being associated with Hamas. And I had friends who are very smart people who felt that that was okay. And that is so disturbing to me. And it's, I think, like the great, one of the great powers of photography is that you you can you can create imagery that makes it undeniable that that has emotional value and can create empathy and understanding and maybe like a real connection. And so you can identify with someone who is completely different from yourself in a world where it's yeah, it's very, very disturbing what's happening, and what's always happened in a way. But I think people are just becoming so distant with our screens, you know.
I'm not being distant. I'm checking questions.
Yeah,
There's
yeah.
many of them. This one actually sort of fits into what you were just talking about. And there's a question saying, how do you ensure the safety and dignity of the people you photograph, especially in vulnerable situations?
It's yeah. I mean, it's something that I can never do well enough. I worked on a project a handful of years ago in Skid Row in LA. Skid Row is a place of just homeless people and drug addicts, and it's like it's a very hard place to just walk through because it's so dark. And I really struggled with like how to present that place, because of course on one hand I could go to that place and I could make beautiful imagery of homeless people and bring a backdrop and a beauty dish and a lot of colors and make it something beautiful, and that's great, and other people have done that. I felt like my role was going and just showing what it looks like. And of course, black and white is, I mean, the world is not in black and white, but black and white can make things easier to understand and identify with and feel. So
There's another
yes.
question, which is almost sort of the flip side of the coin, which is when you work in conflict zones, how do you protect your own safety without losing the emotional connection to what you photograph?
I mean,
And you've been in very difficult circumstances while doing that, haven't you?
yeah, I mean, I fortunately have been connected with like some really amazing colleagues, photographers, writers, journalists, aid workers, in those areas, and also locals, fixers, who are like my guardian angels. And still, even with them, I've been injured a couple times, and I definitely haven't made the right choices. Have not been in the right place at the right time. I mean, I'm lucky I'm here for a variety of reasons. I I think it's yeah. At the end of the day, like we like working in these areas, working in places, especially places where you don't speak the language. It's very we yeah. I mean, our lives are really the local people there and the veterans are the people who are just keeping it all together in some ways.
I think you answered a bit of this, but if you'd like to detail it, there's a question about how you chose the photos for the book. And did you take those photos as we see them, or did you sort of edit them or work on them color-wise?
Yeah, so essentially I photographed these in the most like in the flattest way possible. By that I mean, so these images were all made on an iPhone. The When I use the phone, the way that I expose is I really try and expose, and so I have a very flat image, and by that I mean So I have as much of the highlights and the shadows as I can. And it's like something that I learned years ago when I was reading an Ansel Adams book, that the idea is capturing as much of the range of exposure as you can. So when you print later, and so when you process it, there's more possibilities for interpretation. And with a regular camera, I have a special, like I shoot an S-Log, so I shoot like a very flat, raw gray file, and then I process it later. But the images haven't been cropped, so they're all uncropped.
And they're taken by phone, so
Yeah, all the images were made on the phone, yeah.
Maybe a final audience question, and because we're at time, but the question is, how do poetry and journalism speak to each other when both try to tell the truth? And I know you're in some way speaking for Mosab, but just as an extension of that, I suppose, what role do you see poetry playing in the world of journalism?
I think they both allow for, I mean, photojournalism is one thing and journalism is one thing, but with poetry and with photography in general, that is not sort of, I mean, yes, it is journalism, but it's also street photography. It's also fine art. Some of it is like it just, like, in some ways it sort of allows for and opens up new conversations that are beyond the headlines, that are beyond like anything specific, that are more about the people and more general questions, and maybe also the emotional connection, what we see in the news. And that's really part of my excitement about the book, is that there's an opportunity of showing more images and showing more sides of this world in this region, in a world where news is very limited. Yeah. And like, yeah, that's always, I have a couple other books as well. My first book is called Libyan Sugar, and it's about the experience of going to war. And in that book, there's really a lot of imagery, of all kinds. And I think it's showing conflict from 100 views instead of one or three or five, as we often see in newspapers, is very important. And so people now and also in the future have an idea of like what was there,
Yeah.
and who was there and how things looked and all that.
And you're writing a memoir as well.
Yeah.
What
Yeah.
is it that you would like your daughter to hold on to in that memoir?
Yeah. So yeah, it's like it's about a certain number of years in my life, where I was doing a lot of this work, and then I had PTSD at some point, and I went through this whole healing process. And around that time, she was born, and then becoming a father. And when I began writing, it was really just, I mean, I've always written. I have a journal, over like years and years. But when I began writing it, I was just writing about what happened and how it affected me. But then I realized, oh wow, a lot of times while I was writing, I was thinking of her. Nowadays, my mind, I mean, even last night, I have a friend here who's doing a residency at one of the colleges, and he's here for like however many weeks or a month or two altogether. And I said, I wish I could do that, but I just can't, go places for that amount of time anymore. Actually, I can. If I spoke with Poppy's mom, I could probably get that, but it just like shows my devotion as a father, And so I think it's just to like share with her experiences I've had, good and bad, and things that I'm proud of, but also things I regret. And it's made me pause multiple times, because, there's also things that that I would write about, but now that she's alive, I don't know if I want to write about the foolish things I did. So.
Well, sometimes it's fair warning.
Yeah.
Michael, thank you so much
Thank you
for
so
being
much.
so generous with your time and sharing your art and your work. And I'm sorry Musab couldn't join us, but I think in many ways his words were present with us. And I wish you all the very best for this project.
Yeah. Thank you so
Thank you
much.
all.
Thank you. Bye.